If silence makes certain people uncomfortable around you, you've probably questioned yourself more than once. You've wondered if you're being rude or distant or socially awkward. Maybe someone has even told you that you're hard to read, as if that were a flaw. But psychology says something very different. Your silence isn't awkward, it's destabilizing to people who rely on control. You've noticed a strange pattern. Some people seem completely fine with you at first, friendly, engaging, until the moment you stop explaining yourself, until you stop reacting the way they expect, until you stop filling the silence for them. And then, something shifts. Their tone changes, they become tense, they push harder. That change isn't random. Here's the part no one explains to you. Manipulative people don't fear confrontation. They fear not knowing where they stand. They need feedback to feel safe. Your reactions tell them how much pressure they can apply, which angle works, when to escalate, when to retreat. They're constantly adjusting. Not consciously, always, but instinctively. When you stay silent, that system breaks. You're not resisting them. You're not challenging them. You're doing something far more unsettling. You're removing their ability to calibrate you. And without calibration, control collapses. Silence is emotionally opaque. It doesn't reveal intention. It doesn't confirm assumptions. It doesn't reassure insecurity. For people who rely on emotional leverage, that feels dangerous. Not because silence attacks them, but because it leaves them exposed. You may have noticed this escalation. When you don't respond, they speak more. They explain themselves unprompted. They justify things you didn't question. They overshare. This isn't confidence, it's anxiety. Silence removes their script. And when the script is gone, the real person leaks out. This is why manipulators often say things like, "Why are you being like this? You're judging me. You think you're better than everyone." Pause and notice something important. These statements aren't observations, they're projections. They're describing what they feel when they can't read you. Psychology shows that people who struggle with control also struggle with ambiguity. They don't want conflict, they want certainty. They want to know what you think, how you feel, where they stand. Silence denies them that. And denial feels like rejection to someone who expects access. You've probably tried to fix this before. You softened your tone. You explained your intentions. You reassured them that everything was fine. And somehow, it only made the situation worse. That's not your imagination. Here's why. Manipulation feeds on access. The more access someone has to your inner world, the more material they have to shape you, your emotions, your doubts, your explanations. When you explain yourself, you hand them leverage. Silence takes it back. Silence isn't passive, it's selective availability. It says, you don't automatically get access to my thoughts just because you're uncomfortable without them. And that boundary triggers people who feel entitled to emotional transparency. This is why silence often provokes. Manipulative people will try to create urgency, accuse you of being cold, imply disrespect, frame your silence as aggression. They're not offended. They're trying to restore control. They need you to react. Watch carefully what happens if you don't. The people who respect you will slow down. They'll give you space. They'll adjust their behavior. They'll check in rather than push. The people who don't respect you will escalate. They'll demand. They'll guilt. They'll provoke. Silence reveals this difference quickly. And this is where quiet people often misunderstand themselves. You think your silence is a flaw because it causes problems, but psychology shows something else. Silence doesn't create dysfunction, it exposes it. Manipulative behavior survives in noise, in over-explaining, in emotional reactivity, in constant reassurance. Silence removes the cover. It doesn't accuse, it doesn't confront, it simply stops participating. This is also why silence feels powerful. and why it scares people who rely on influence. They can't twist what you don't say. They can't reframe what you don't offer. They can't exploit what you don't expose. Silence limits manipulability. And here's the part you may not have realized yet. You don't owe anyone emotional availability. You don't owe constant reassurance. You don't owe explanations for your inner state. Psychology calls this emotional boundary clarity. You decide who gets access, not whoever demands it. Quiet people often think they need to be more open to avoid misunderstanding, but openness without boundaries is vulnerability without protection. Silence, used intentionally, is not withdrawal. It's discernment. If your silence makes someone uncomfortable, that doesn't mean you're doing something wrong. It means you're no longer emotionally manageable. You're no longer feeding their expectations. You're no longer available by default. And not everyone can tolerate that shift. Here's the reframe you need to hold on to. Silence isn't weakness, it's restraint. It's choosing not to give access to people who haven't earned it. Manipulators thrive on reaction. They struggle with stillness because stillness gives them nowhere to attach. You don't need to be louder. You don't need to explain yourself better. You don't need to perform comfort. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is remain unreadable. Final thought. Silence doesn't attack manipulators. It simply removes the conditions that allow manipulation to exist. And when those conditions disappear, discomfort is inevitable. Not for you, for them. If this video put words to something you've felt for a long time, subscribe. The next video explores what happens when you stop explaining yourself altogether and how that changes every relationship in your life.